And for more on the changing Chinese sports landscape here in Beijing, we're having Dong Jun, official commentator at the Beijing 2008 Olympic Games and also co-founder of Ever Beijing. Meanwhile, in London, we are joined by Mr. Mihir Bose, who is a former BBC sports editor and now a columnist for the London Evening Standard. In New York, we're having Mr. Robert Boland, professor of sports law at Ohio University, also principal of Boland Sports Practice. Welcome to the three of you, gentlemen. On the third day of the Rio Olympic Games, a lot of exciting games going on all at the same time. I'm sure you and I, together with our audience, have been following a lot of them. Having said that, though, there has been debate on the sideline of the Rio Olympic Games. Should national pride, should the so-called national greatness still be one factor in the Olympic Games, or it should be national boundary free? Professor Boland.
Well, that's a great question, but we've talked about the Olympics competing only under an athletic flag, but they still compete under their national flags. They're still a nationalistic exercise, and it seems to have a positive effect around the world once the games begin. I think we saw a lot of controversy before the games about that, but I think we'll see the games progressing in a very, very wonderful way inside them. And I'm not sure that taking country and flag out of the games is an important goal for anyone, really.
However, there has been debate, Mr. Dong, here in Beijing, whether China has been too much putting its emphasis on winning gold medals and so-called national pride and national greatness into sports. What exactly do you think is the degree that the Chinese are considering these issues together? Or actually they are more and more enjoying the sports themselves?
Well, I think China is undergoing a significant transition from the overwhelming majority of the population only watching and enjoying and cheering and taking pride in their athletes winning outside of China, to a new stage or phase of their lifestyle change, of more people getting involved and practicing sports as their hobby for a better well-being, physically and mentally. And I really don't think the two things are in conflict. They can go together. But indeed, the fact or the reality in the past is indeed more people just watched, just enjoy watching instead of practicing or even have a basic touch of how the sport actually feels.
And enjoy only watching the gold medals.
Yes.
Even to that extent.
But the attention of Chinese to Olympic sports or any sports competitions in the world is absolutely, dominant or world number one. You never need to motivate them to watch.
Mr. Bose, you know this better than I do. You've been a sports commentator for a long time. So you see China has been shouldering responsibility to host the year 2022 Winter Olympic Games, which could be expensive, and yet China promised it will not be held in a grandiose way just to move forward the Olympic movement. You also see Chinese sponsorships coming into Olympic Games, shouldering more financial burdens and responsibilities. Meanwhile, you see Chinese broadcasting rights are providing more contribution to the IOC and the Olympic movement as a whole. So what do you think is China's role in the Olympic movement? And what do you make of the evolving attitude, as Mr. Dong in Beijing said, about the Chinese vis-a-vis their relations with the Olympic Games?
Well, actually, this is quite an important Olympics for the movement, because the preliminary to this was, of course, the great Russian doping scandal, where, according to the WADA report, the World Anti-Doping Agency report, the Russian state was involved, the Secret Service was involved. That shows, if you like, the marriage between the state and sport. And why did China, after all, get the Winter Games? Because several countries withdrew. So the Olympic movement is, to a certain extent, facing a crisis. Can it hold these big events once in 2 years, Winter Games, once in 4 years, making big events every 2 years. Can they hold this? Can they sort of leave behind legacies which the city and the state then has to spend a lot of money trying to make up for it? So that's one thing. And as far as China is concerned, I can well understand that China, which for a long time, for various reasons we know well, didn't take part in the Olympics, has come on and made a huge impression. But the problem with the Olympics is that while it's a celebration of sport, it's also a celebration of nationalism. Where is the divide? Sometimes, and what we have seen recently, is a celebration of nationalism, national pride. We are better than you takes over from sport, and that dividing line is increasingly being crossed. So it becomes a question of saying, if we win more gold medals, then we must be the greater country.
Well, Professor Boland, do you agree with that? Usually the United States, Team USA, is the number one on the tally.
Well, I actually disagree to this extent, although I do believe nationalism has been an intrinsic part of the Olympic movement, going back to the Greek city-states battling each other as a surrogate for war. But I actually think we create greater understanding in the Olympics. I think for many of us in the West, and maybe that's a myopic view, the 2008 Beijing Games were really our first understanding and taste of modern China, and a really opening of that nation to us. So, and I think China has gained a lot in the Olympic movement. China is a maturing Olympic power. It may be mirroring the United States as we move away from sort of a goal to win and adopt certain sports in the Olympic program to the goal of just being good and participating in them. So I think we're in a transitionary period. I do agree with your guest in London who talked about this being important and China being a very, very important nation for the IOC and the Olympic movement, and a great deal being at stake in Beijing. But I'm not sure that nationalism is the only driving force. I think it was for Russia and their doping issue, and it can be for certain nations, but I think it does still operate to create a lot
understanding. Professor Boland, very interesting.
Can I come in here?
Yes,
can
very
I come
briefly.
in here for
Go
a
ahead,
second?
Sir.
Two-thirds of China's medals have been won in only gold medals have been won in only 6 sports. So what is the extent of the sporting reach? If Olympics is going to be about getting everybody to play sports, China has concentrated on winning medals. Nothing wrong with that, but let's not pretend it is making every Chinese a sportsman or conscious of sport.
You made your point. Let's have Mr. Dong Jun here in Beijing to reveal what you think from the Chinese perspective.
Well, I can't comment on Western countries, but for a country like China, maybe India in the future, if you want to popularize one sport, which is very new idea to the population, you need some icons, some models to play as as an example for the people, and like Tiger Woods to generate a whole generation of Americans to follow him,
and Li
to be a golfer.
She becomes great. Every Chinese girl follows.
You have to go through that stage.
Yao Ming for basketball as well.
Especially true for China. You first need the champions to be the role models of young people who have no idea how to play the sports.
Very interesting. Having said that, let me move to another interesting topic. We talk about Olympic movement, and we do see challenges facing the Olympic movement. Doping issue, as many of you participated in our program earlier have already talked about that, but this time, during the opening days of the Olympic Games, we see that doping issue once again divide teams, divide sports. For example, swimming. Professor Boland, you probably is aware of one of the biggest piece of stories going on right now between China and Australia swimmers. The gold medalist, Mr. Horton, coming from Australia, was accusing the second winner, the silver medalist, Sun Yang from China, who was the last champion during the London Olympic Games, as doping problematic. However, Sun denied that, and he also said he should be respected because he has already becoming doping free. That's why he participated in the Olympic Games. And now, Professor Boland, the Chinese side, including Mr. Sun, is demanding an apology. Let's just put this specific case out here as an interesting example to see how much people can do, how much decency people should give to the whole movement of the Olympic Games. What athletes should do, what delegations should do, and what the real Olympic Games should do, Professor Boland.
Well, I think in answer to your question, there is always some finger pointing between nations. Seems a particularly troubling one where the winner accuses the person in second place of doping. That seems to be kind of problematic right there, and a bit sour grapes, as we would say in the United States. But the challenge, I think, we always see a little bit of finger pointing. We're seeing it with an American breaststroker and a Russian female breaststroker also in the pool. So I don't think that's abnormal. I think the key is that we learn more in the competition. Doping certainly has been a front burner issue, but I'm not sure it's the only issue here. And I think it's an issue that the Olympics will get control of because they have neutral testing.
Will this doping issue further divide the nations? Will this destroy further the grace of the Olympic movement and also sports as a whole, Mr. Dong?
Well, I absolutely agree to the point that there should be zero tolerance for doping in the Olympic world, but only based on fact. And doping should be, sanctions or penalties should be against the individuals based on the fact that they tested positive in internationally, guaranteed testing system. So far, the issue or the war of wars between Sun Yang and Horton, in my first impression, was a personal one. It's between the two swimmers themselves. And in my first impression, that Horton wasn't very well educated. Not sufficiently, because he made those comments in front of the camera to the media instead of in private. And Sun Xiang always showed, friendly gestures to him, and he wouldn't accept. But of course, back home here, because of such a large population and the supporters behind Sun Xiang,
yeah, he got a lot of fans here in China.
They turned somewhat, nationalistic a bit. But I think it's fair for Sun Xiang to fight back.
Sun Yang
to fight back, especially when the entire swimming team from Australia were behind Horton. And apparently Horton got the information about Sun Yang's implication from the team officials. And then it's up to Team China to negotiate or even ask for arbitration from the IOC. I think it's very fair because in the past, when personal finger pointing took place, even between track and field athletes inside the United States.
That's right. That's very true. That's where the when there's competition, people would apply all kinds of different ways to compete. But the thing is, false accusation about doping, should that be used as a way to tackle your rival right before the competition in order to destruct that athlete? That is the question. That is also
intolerable.
That is also the decency about sports. Mr. Bose, of course, all the athletes that are participating in the Rio Olympic Games, they are being presumed innocent from doping because they have already been cleared by their national team and the Olympic Games Rio as well to participate. So now comes the question, doping should not be tolerable 100%. However, on the other hand, what about decency in terms of strategies? What about decency and friendliness among competitors? And isn't Olympic Games should also be about promoting something that we all believe in, which is better for the world? Mr. Bose, I don't want you to comment on this specific case because we really need to have more information, but just generally speaking, where are we going from here, Mr. Bose?
Well, you talk about decency. The first thing is, when an athlete is found guilty, they never raise up their hand and say, yes, I'm guilty. Recall what Ben Johnson said. He said, my drink was spiked. You look at any athlete. There was a German athlete who said, there were drugs in my toothpaste. How did it come there? Nobody knows. That is the first point. Secondly, you said it is presumed innocent. You can't presume innocent in drugs anymore with athletes because these athletes, Rio might show that we have very few drug tests. Remember, the IOC is going to store these samples and test them again.
Right.
And the third question is, the World Anti-Doping Agency does not have its own police force. It does not have its own real mechanism to test. These stories about Russia, where have they come out from? From the media, not from the World Anti-Doping Agency, which is supposed to be the regulatory body.
3 points, very interesting. So what is Mr. Bose seem to suggest is that everybody is presumed now guilty rather than innocent who are participating in the Olympic Games. Is that true? They are only guilty until they are proved innocent. Every one of them participating in the Olympic Games this time?
I think WADA or the anti-doping agency should play the absolute role in this issue. I think when it comes to decency issue, it's not up to Carl Lewis to finger point, Ben Johnson that you are guilty of doping. It's up to the international
WADA
agency to decide that.
And also the Olympic Committee itself. Professor Boland, you want to come into this discussion?
Yeah, I don't think as far as doping, the athletes have always been ahead of the policing agencies or the doping agencies, and they always will be probably. I think we do a pretty good job. I think these will be the most secure and anti-doping Olympics with the certifications that have been put in place in a neutral lab. Yeah. It's the best we can do, and I think the aspect of sportsmanship that you're talking about is really going to happen innately in the Olympics. We always see these stories come up. We'll always see some figure pointing and bad sportsmanship, but the games produce far greater moments of wonderful sportsmanship, and I think they need to be allowed to percolate up organically.
All right. Very interesting topic. I'm sure that debate will continue throughout this whole Rio Olympic Games. That's a good thing because that makes people pay attention to these very important issues, anti-doping and decency sportsmanship in the overall Olympic movement. Having said that, though, there's another interesting point. That is, what are we doing sports for? For example, during the Rio Olympic Games and other Olympic Games today, more and more people believe here in China, sports is about keeping healthy and having fun. It's not just about gold medals anymore. For instance, there are several marathons in China where running has become the vogue of the day. More than 1.5 million people, look at the number over there, took part in over 130 distance running events in the year 2015. Bodybuilding and many other sports are also on the rise in this country. While people are getting wealthier, they really want to get healthier. If everything goes as expected, the country will have 435 million people regularly taking part in sports by the year 2020. Professor Boland, I know when it comes to China, every number has become gigantic. So I'm sure those members in...
That's what we look at in the United States.
That's right. Well, impress our audience a lot. But what do you make? This is interesting transition from looking at only with national pride to something that I can do and I can do well.
Yeah, I think that was always the goal of really joining the Olympic movement. It has a public health benefit in terms of leaving legacy and facilities. I think it has a wonderful benefit to the climate and the environment. And I think for China, as China modernizes across its very large population, it brings people into modernity very quickly. Sports produces greater equality, greater exposure of people to other people and cultures. So I think it has a very positive effect societally, and I think this is going to be a wonderful thing for China. And I think for marketers who love sport around the world, they see China as the most powerful awakening market, and I think in this case with good reason.
Absolutely. Mr. Bose, we only have 1 minute left, so you and Mr. Dong gonna share that 1 minute, 30 seconds for you.
Well, I'm afraid this idea that sports will make us from couch potatoes into Usain Bolt is a completely erroneous idea. What sports does is brings people together, it brings nations together. I know very little about Chinese music and I'm not sure I could understand it. But when I see a great Chinese diver or a badminton player, I can understand that and I can appreciate that. I don't need any great classics and Confucius to understand that. That is the great measure of sport, that it can bring people together.
All right, you said it with a lot of passion. And what about you, Mr. Dong? 30 seconds left for you as well.
I agree with both gentlemen in their own respective points, but I also like to point out that this is the digital age, and with so many social media and the internet, community looking for icons and heroes or the red hot sensations. The Olympics is a very good stage and opportunity for them to catch some new faces for their netizens to follow. This is a golden opportunity.